session was enjoyable. We're going to crack on with the second session of the day. My name is Jane Witherspoon. I'm the Bureau Chief for the Middle East for Euronews, and it's my pleasure to be with you for our session, When Will the World Run on Blockchain? And my esteemed panel consists of Ola Doudin, co-founder and CEO of BitOasis, Andrew Durgee, head of Republic Crypto Republic, and Jen Scott, founding partner in Capital. So I just want to point out, first of all, as well, it's thrilling to be here with an all-female panel, apart from Andrew. I bet this is a first for you, I think.
It is, and fantastic. I immediately recognized, I was like, this is amazing to be, for this type of panel to happen, not only in the industry, but to happen here in Saudi is particularly interesting. Yeah.
Great. Well, some of the
token mail.
Token mail.
Oh, I'm fine with that.
Roads between two thorns. Well, what we're going to be discussing, amongst other things today, is how we can ensure a balance between the adoption of blockchain-driven solutions and the overarching need for security and transparency in a digital-first world. So, Andrew, not to single you out again, but I will start with you. Globally, where does blockchain and crypto stand today? You know, has progress paused or reset, or is this the calm before another surge?
Yeah, I think the reality is we still have a long way to go, right? Everyone wants to be the adoption layer, because that's always seen as the fun place. But the reality is we still very much sit in the infrastructure side. If you look at kind of human history, it takes about 25 to 30 years for humans to adopt a new data transfer technology. So if you look at, let's say, radio, which was invented in the 1890s, wasn't in the homes until like 1920s. Television was invented in the 1920s, wasn't in homes until the 1950s. TCP/IP was created, which is really the internet, in 1970, and really wasn't in homes until like 1995, right? And so what you're looking at is a human conditioning problem. It's actually not a technology problem. And so there's a time component to it. There is one really unique fact related to that, though, which is in 1983, TCP/IP was accepted as this standardized form for internet development. It's the first time they started to see standardization around that type of technology. And that was 13 years after its creation, right? Now we're 14 or so years after the creation of Bitcoin, and we're just starting now to see standardization. Like, that's not a coincidence. Like, that's the reality of the human problem. So we're still very early in that framework. We're still within the infrastructure side of things, but things are definitely getting exciting. It will get faster because blockchain is borderless, it's open source, all coding is done in English. Like, these are all accelerators, but we still are going to have to deal with that human conditioning problem to some degree.
We were just talking about this backstage, and you wanted to add in, Ola?
Yeah, actually one point that I also would like to add when it comes to, will the world run on blockchain? So, obviously, when we're dealing with regulators, when dealing with different stakeholders here in the region, we're seeing things actually moving forward and not slowing down. I think it's very easy to get distracted with news headlines, because a lot of it is, obviously, trying to kind of paint a different picture for perhaps clicks or any of that. But us as BitOasis, as practitioners or builders on the ground, what we're seeing is that there's a lot more will and openness to set the right regulations to open up the markets. Obviously last year was a difficult year in terms of some of the events that we've seen happen in the space, be it FTX and obviously all sort of from a Luna crash, 3AC, FTX onwards. But the reality on the ground is that adoption continues to grow in the region. Saudi actually has grown in terms of retail and institutional adoption by 12% compared to last year, and we're actually in the bear market. So adoption continues to grow from the ground up, but also top down. We're seeing proper regulation being set here in the region, particularly I would say in the UAE and Bahrain.
Leading on for that, Jen, you come from a very different perspective with the Chinese market. I mean, how can leaders drive the adoption? What have you seen? What are your experiences?
So I think there's crypto and there's blockchain. And in terms of crypto, over the years, despite the ups and downs of the market, we have seen steady adoption. More and more people start to get their exposure in crypto, not only just individuals, but also very established financial institutions. But then there's blockchain. I think from blockchain's adoption point of view, there are a few aspects, and that's really worth watching. And I think those few fields, to me, are the fields that's going to really start to become very mainstream. Number one is tokenization of real assets.
Yeah.
Larry Fink has been saying the future of financial market is tokenized real asset. And to me, I think tokenized real assets now we use to trade, from commodities to bond to rates, etc., is no difference compared to in the 70s when we replaced the paper and the back office with the electronic. So this process will happen. Earlier this year in Hong Kong, Hong Kong government actually worked with Goldman Sachs to issue about $100 million worth of green bond that's completely tokenized. So it's starting to happen, and I think this part of the market is going to ripe to really take off, probably end of this year or next year. Second part is, as generative AI is really become very pervasive in everything we do, generative AI is built on large model, and large model rely on a lot of data. And when the world is really running by so much data that's supporting such important productive force, then who's producing the data become very important. Vast majority of the data is still produced by individuals and companies that not necessarily are the tech companies. Tech companies just processing and collecting your data. So at some point, this data ownership will have to come to realization. And to do that, we also need to use blockchain. The third part probably is happening everywhere in the world, but China is definitely leading the way, which is central bank backed digital currency. So digital RMB, it's been doing trial for so long. They started to do research in 2014. Right now, they can basically turn it on any time and when they're ready. And in EU, US, Australia, Europe, Middle East, etc., multiple countries have been really working on central bank, back the digital currency as well. So I think the crypto side, we see, gradual adoption, but that's still compared to the mainstream is minority. But those are three areas I think it's really going to determine in the coming few years, blockchain is going to run the world.
I definitely want to explore the ownership conversation in a little bit, but I'm going to take it back a little bit to the adoption and assets. And Andrew, I know you're keen to discuss how this is going to come in the form of security tokens, cultural assets. Talk to us about what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think when we look on, again, kind of on the adoption side, like there's two different types of adoption. There's the speculative, like trading aspect, which you live in and rock at in the Middle East, and then there's like how is it being used, like functionally, and there's definitely there's a divide between that, and one of the biggest reasons for that divide is actually regulatory frameworks. It's very hard to touch these assets in like most major jurisdictions, but security tokens are the easiest to touch because those are very clear. Like the regulatory frameworks for security tokens, even in the US, are much easier than everywhere else because those are the same laws that have been governing securities since the 30s. So when you look at how retail will be able to touch security tokens, they're like the swimming lanes for operating there is a lot clearer. And the reason that we like the culture assets the most is because those are generally the most appealing or most interesting to retail investors. Like, we look at I could wallpaper my office with tokenized real estate offerings, but no one wants to own some fractionalized apartment in Edgewater, New Jersey. That's like not interesting, right?
We were talking about Saudi gaming, for instance, as well.
Yeah,
I mean, like right here.
When we look at those types of assets, music, film, sports, things that have already community around them, things that people can also engage with and touch, that becomes particularly interesting. So like we're tokenizing 5% of an EPL team in England, which will be public in the next couple weeks, and we'll be selling it to fans, right? But with that, not only are they having a financial connection to that team now, and they're owning a percentage of that team if that team gets sold and whatnot, but we're building in feature sets like if you own a certain amount of tokens, you can meet the players or travel with the team, or you have your own box within the stadium, and creating these additional ways to engage between the content or the creator or the business and then the fans, that creates something special. So I think that's the first place that we'll really start to see that happening at scale.
Ola, did you want to add into that? I could see you nodding.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a big overlap, obviously, between what you're seeing and what we're seeing as well. So yeah, definitely BitOasis today, we're focused on providing easy, safe, regulated means for retail and high net worth individuals to trade crypto assets or buy and sell or custodize, which much of it is actually the larger market cap tokens, where there's a lot of obviously speculation and to some extent also sort of long-term investment and seeing Bitcoin becoming an alternative asset class. So for us, adoption and what we're seeing actually happening from a user perspective is two things are very important. One is regulation and trust. So regulation and trust means for us as a company, regulatory clarity. So obviously in the UAE where we're headquartered, so we're under the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority, we have that clarity for us to be able to continue to grow. But the larger markets in the Middle East, Saudi being number one, regulatory frameworks are still work in progress. There aren't really licenses for.
It's such a fast-moving ecosystem, I think, here.
100%.
What are the challenges with that then for this regulation?
So there are different, I think, challenges. So we're in constant discussions and obviously, I would say meetings with regulators across the region, but specifically with Saudi. There are different reasons, I think, when you look at crypto, why those frameworks aren't yet in place. Saudi, number one, is the largest market when it comes to adoption of crypto, in the region. I think there's around 45 billion or so on yearly basis in terms of crypto assets that are leaving the country, going to offshore platforms, being traded, and where users or Saudi consumers have their assets outside of the country. There are a lot of risks when it comes to crypto, and I think the regulators are taking their time to ensure that they have the right regulatory frameworks where you are still providing clarity and competitiveness for this space to continue to innovate, but at the same time addressing the right risks from a financial perspective, monetary perspective, and all of that. But we believe that once the regulators have that as a top priority in terms of having the right frameworks in place, Saudi would move very quickly on that, particularly because crypto is, sort of another phrase for the same coin with gaming, where it's, part and parcel of the gaming ecosystem, or to enable gaming as an industry. So, we think there's a lot of overlaps when it comes to that. That ultimately it would be prioritized to ensure that there's the right frameworks in place. The other part that we're seeing where governments or, let's say, regulators are really interested to enable as an industry, which is tokenizing real-world assets.
Okay,
so, the Gulf is a commodity-rich economy, be it from, physical commodities, gold, to, oil and other industries as well, including, obviously, tokenizing securities, and financial markets. So we see a big, I would say, interest from Abu Dhabi and Dubai as governments to enable this industry. Saudi ultimately, obviously, will be interested in terms of opening up those industry as they set the right frameworks as well.
I think, Jen, you're seeing that in terms of the real assets, aren't you, in the markets that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's a huge benefit, to tokenize real assets, especially like those commodities. Like, so one of my portfolio companies, that's your funder sitting in the front row here, ABT in Hong Kong, they help the Hong Kong Gold and Silver Exchange, which is one of the most conservative, most old-fashioned organizations there are, and help them to tokenize gold. So instead of taking the gold bar and transportation, security, cost, they just have a one-to-one digital representation of the physical gold. And it's completely real liability for the exchange, but it's one-on-one redeemable. So you can basically just buy and sell, digital gold, and whenever you need, you can redeem your physical gold. This could also be, imagine all the private banks, right? When they, sell gold product, you don't have to sell the physical gold, you just buy the digital gold representative. So the challenge with this, though, because tokenization itself is actually very simple. The team has already developed the process that's so easy, basically a few buttons. Every time they demo to me, they always say Jan token. So the issue, like all this Jan token in the system, like with the few button make me feel very uncomfortable. But the tokenization process is really, really easy. The challenge is naturally at the back office, especially the real world asset. What you need to make it happen is that the human process, there's a reason why there's such complicated compliance and protocol, because there's real liability. To translate that human process into logic, and then from that logic, translate into smart contract. The process, translate that physical process to logic, requires very advanced math, very elegant math, to translate that in a very secure way. So that's the real barrier. So those teams with 6 math PhDs and with international math Olympian champions debate about this all the time to make sure that those real liabilities in the back end is truly representing the human process with no mistake in whatever scenario. So this has been developing for a while. I see the mass adoption for starting with all the commodities. Middle East is the ideal market for that. But beyond commodities, any kind of assets, especially type of assets that require more or can benefit with more liquidity, would really have great appetite to go into this market to tokenize.
Andrew, we were backstage and we were talking how you've been in this business 15 years ago. 15 years ago,
in February, it'll be 15.
February, you got into it.
Don't tell us your age.
I'm 40 recently.
Just a baby.
Going on 30, but
I mean,
40.
well, the thing that we talk about is people see the highs, they don't see the downsides of it, the hard work that goes into it. And I just wondered, how can leaders ensure undeserved groups benefit equally from blockchain's democratizing potential across areas like payments, investments, and identity?
Well, I mean, the magic of the space is that it's generally open source, right?
Yeah.
So anybody can participate,
Yeah.
anyone can touch it, right? It's the reason that I love the industry. I'm an engineer, and I like learning, and it's like it moves so fast. Every day I'm learning something new. For 15 years, right? Every day now is something new, and it's not slowing down. It's only accelerating, right? So, as far as the democratized finance component of it, that was the nature when it first started. Like when Bitcoin first started, particularly in the US, there were 2 types of people if you go to a conference. There was diehard engineers and these crazy anti-government libertarians that wore all camo. That was your conference. 2 of which people should most likely never meet. But these were the 2 people that you'd be going to dinner with in the beginning,
That's
right?
very true.
But that's really shows like how it can touch anybody. Like anybody has the ability to reach into this thing and then participate at any level that they want, right? Now we're starting to see obviously more emulsification and vertical building in different areas. I think identity is a super interesting one. It's an area that we're pretty heavily focused in, and it's one that most likely everyone is going to be using and will have no idea. But anyway, the reality is that it's industry agnostic, it's stage agnostic, and it's jurisdictionally agnostic.
Ola, anything to add into that? Oh, you got your microphone. I saw the microphone was down. That was like, next question.
Yeah. I think some of the things that we're excited about, especially here, I would say in the region, adding obviously to what Jen and Andrew said. So a recent survey from an ecosystem player across UAE and Saudi actually mentioned that 93% of the high net worth individuals that they surveyed in the region are actually looking to invest in crypto. And that survey was actually done throughout the bear market. So we think that institutional adoption, and when we say institutional adoption in the region, we're really talking about high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals, say mostly on the family office side. We're still not seeing asset managers or for what it's worth, like sovereign wealth funds coming into crypto yet. But we're definitely seeing deep pockets of money wanting to invest in crypto. And I think 43% of the high net worth individuals to ultra high net worth individuals that they surveyed are actually looking to allocate 5 to 10% of their net worth into crypto. So institutional adoption, I think, is something that is exciting that we see as an opportunity here in the region, along obviously with the tokenization that we've talked about at length. So those are two things that from a regional perspective we think are big opportunities to capture, hopefully as the market also recovers.
Jen, Andrew was talking about acceleration, when we look at technology and how quickly everything is advancing. The challenge, I guess, how do you keep up with that and the speed of the acceleration?
Oh, it's a matter of survival. You just do. I mean, often we come to conferences like this, topics is so divided by one specific technology, but none of the technology actually develop in isolation. On this topic, when will the world run on blockchain itself, one of the most fundamental thing that's happening right now is just, since last November, ChatGPT 3 launched, the world suddenly realized the interaction with AI, the barrier has reduced to as long as you are able to type, just talking to AI as a human, and then you will be able to have the machine-human interaction. And this has made the mass adoption of AI become so easy and so fast and so broad. And so I alluded a little bit earlier, right now, the world suddenly realized, okay, it's so important, not only just all these companies building large model, but what about the companies who cannot build large model, but we actually produce a lot of data? Do I use a third-party large model to submit all our trade secrets, all our own data to that model? How do we protect our own data to be part of this greater generative AI ecosystem? So all of this begging the question of data ownership. And also individuals as well, right? So I think in terms of regulation in this space, I look at China's data regulation the closest because it's in our ecosystem. In 2020 March, State Council issued a policy basically named that the 5 key factors of productions are land, capital, labor, technology, and data. And then that followed with a series of policies to encourage to establish the economic value of data and recognize that part. You cannot do that part without using blockchain. Recently, in August, China actually just established National Data Bureau. So in a lot of countries that often when it comes to data, the regulators only focus on the security side. So it's truly regulator, right? So National Data Bureau has 2 different parts of the roles. One is they have to protect the securities, both in terms of national security and also privacy of the individual. They also want to prevent this kind of data monopoly. The implication for preventing data monopoly is to start to encourage and establish data ownership of the smaller organizations, non-tech organizations, and individuals. And the second part of National Data Bureau's role is to be super strategic. If you think about that, China's overall GDP is already comparable to the US, but when it comes to per capita income, it's a long way to go.
Yeah.
But China is also the most digitalized large economy in the world, except all the value created by data and digital is concentrated by few tech companies. So if that's kind of realized at individuals level, that would significantly increase this kind of per capita income as well. So super strategic. I think those areas with all these different technologies happening at the same time is really how we should look at where blockchain as part of this bigger ecosystem can play a very, very important fundamental infrastructure role.
Yeah, we see AI and blockchain as the same thing.
Yeah.
And we don't see a scenario where AI accelerates without it. Because AI needs some way to transact and communicate with each other in an immutable fashion, and blockchain is the obviously perfect solution for that. So those 2 things are really synonymous for us.
Do you think they're going to be the biggest factor in terms of dramatically transforming the sphere? over the next 5 to 10 years?
Sphere is like the planet.
When will the world run on blockchain? That's the title of the session.
When will the world run on blockchain? I don't know that answer, but I do know that when the world runs on AI, it will inevitably be running on blockchain regardless.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. Yeah.
Best friends.
Ola, over to you. Any comments on that?
No, I mean, obviously, totally agree. But for us, obviously, through our work with regulators, I think what we would need to be able to, not going to comment particularly on the marriage of, blockchain and AI, but from an application perspective, to be able to leverage that as builders, we would need regulatory clarity for sure. And I think for us, the final comments that I would say, more regulatory clarity.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. Please put your hands together for Ola, Andrew, and Jen. What a fabulous panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.